How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation, where I cover all of the latest PlayStation news. I've done it for 550 videos, I'm pretty sure at this point. So if you're new here or you've been here for a while, help me out by subscribing and setting your notifications to all. All right, in today's video, I've got 3 topics to cover, starting out with a new interview with a former CEO of PlayStation who says consoles' days are numbered and that they're at final spec, and boy, do I hope he's wrong. Second on the list, we got even more evidence from Digital Foundry to back up the next-gen PlayStation handheld. And third, PlayStation's on top right now, but at one point they were lucky to survive. All right, let's jump into this first news story here, which is an interview that Sean Layden did over at Eurogamer. There's a lot of little stories that break out of this, which is why I separated them in the video. The first one I want to cover is that he said that PlayStation and other consoles are basically at quote-unquote final spec and that they're going to go away in the next 2 generations. And I not only think he's wrong, but I hope he's wrong. So he starts out this segment of the interview talking about how, like, from PS1 to PS2 there's a big graphical leap, then PS2 to PS3 there was an even bigger graphical leap, and then 3 to 4 they were working on figuring out networking. And then when he's talking about the jump from 4 to 5, he's like, yeah, it's a tiny jump, you can't even see it, only dogs could hear the difference between the graphical fidelity of PlayStation 4 and 5. And like, if you've been watching the channel, you're not going to be surprised that I think he's like completely wrong there. It's not so much that graphics haven't improved tenfold over the PS4 to PS5. The clear problem is that developers aren't finishing their games, right? Like, that's the issue here. There's a lot of games that are trying new things all the time. One of the main games I'm playing right now that I absolutely love is Kingdom Come Deliverance. And I know that's a PS4 game, but it's trying so many new things, and the developers, Warhorse Studios, were completely rewarded for that because that's what people want. But then every other developer out there kind of seems to be making the same game in the AAA field. It's an open world game, it's third-person camera, it's action-based combat, and then it comes out and it runs like crap, and then they do their whole like apology tour where they're like, oh, we missed the mark on these performance things, we had no idea this game was running this way, but we promise we'll fix it over a few months or even a year in the case of a game like Jedi Survivor. Then if you just wait for the collector's edition that comes with all the DLC and everything, a year or so later you get the version of the game that should have shipped on day 1, but we're basically being charged full price for early access. So like, yeah, I understand what he's saying, like where the graphical leap is kind of lessened from console to console, but the gameplay hasn't really changed all that much. And I think that's up to the fact that developers are all kind of chasing the same trends all the time, right? Like Battle Royales got big, so everyone bent over backwards to make a Battle Royale. Now extraction shooters are big. Tarkov got big, so you see games like Delta Force or Gray Zone Warfare on Steam coming out left and right. They follow the same trends throughout the industry instead of trying to innovate themselves. And then on top of that, the vast majority of these AAA developers, despite the fact that they raised the prices on games to $70 this generation for no reason, they release their games completely unfinished and then blame gamers for not buying them. Like, I'm not showing up day 1 for a product that's going to stutter every 5 seconds and have weird pop-in like Stalker 2 on the Xbox Series X. When you walk into a town, it literally pauses for 6 seconds, and that's just completely unacceptable. So I don't blame people for not buying those games. I feel like this whole philosophy that people don't see the graphical jump and aren't buying games because games don't feel new anymore, it's not up to us. It's up to the developers to kind of innovate and do something new instead of remaking the same experiences over and over again and then releasing them 80% done. So yeah, I don't feel like it's on us to kind of figure that out. I think developers need to kind of take a step back and realize that they've really lost their way in terms of how they're making games these days and figure that out before they start complaining about consoles not being powerful enough to run their games. Like, why is every developer switching to Unreal Engine 5? CryEngine is amazing. Hunt Showdown looks and runs great on the PlayStation 5. Kingdom Come Deliverance looks and runs great on the PlayStation 5. Kingdom Come 2 is using CryEngine, and it looks awesome from all the trailers we've seen. Then you've got Cyberpunk's developers, CD Projekt Red. They developed this entire engine for The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, and then right when they figure out how to get it working with Cyberpunk 2077, they're like, oh, Cyberpunk 2 and The Witcher 4 are going to use Unreal Engine 5. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think the problem is the console. I think the problem is the engine that these developers continually use, despite the massive issues it has when the games come out. Like, even if they fix all the issues in Stalker 2 with all the CPU dependent problems and everything like that, the hardware is not really the problem. It's the engine. The engine is busted. It has major stuttering issues because it's too demanding for modern CPUs. You have the exact same issue on the Series X that you do with the best CPU for a PC you can buy. The engine is the problem. So yeah, I don't think the consoles are the issue that he's kind of presenting here. They're not really all the same, and I don't think they're at final spec, because if they are, we're going to have problems going into the future. These engines are just going to keep getting better, and hardware is going to continue to not be able to run them. So in my opinion, at least, it's not the hardware, it's the software. It's the engines they're using. It's them copy and pasting stuff between games like Ubisoft is known to do. It's them throwing launchers in every PC release. It's them not releasing games that are actually finished and then blaming gamers for not playing them. And finally, it's them not listening to their audience. People tell these developers constantly what they want in games, and then they say, no, we know better than you, we're not going to listen to you. And then their games come out, no one buys them, and they're like, man, they're mean to us. They're like, these people suck. They don't buy our games that we work so hard on. But if you don't finish your games, I'm not giving you $70. That's just like the way it is. And whenever you read interviews with Shawn Layden, you got to keep in mind that he works for Tencent now. So theoretically, he's talking about this stuff from the perspective of what's going to make Tencent money. And Tencent is a Chinese company. The Chinese government could say, nope, Sony, you can't sell the PS5 in our country anymore. Nope, Xbox, you can't sell the Xbox in our country anymore. Nintendo, you're out too. So Tencent, their best path forward is for the console to go away so they can release all their games on streaming sticks or the TV or PC or mobile. So if a guy like Shawn Layden is a very higher up person at Tencent, which he is now, his best path forward to continue making lots of money is to let consoles go away. So I don't know. I really hope consoles don't go away, because I play a lot on PC, and as someone who is time limited, the PC is the biggest barrier to actually playing video games. Especially now with how unfinished games are, I need a console to exist so I can just put a disc in, download whatever patches are required, hit X on my controller, and actually play the game. I don't got to screw around with NVIDIA Control Inspector or whatever and set my VSync and frame rate. I don't got to download graphics driver updates. I don't got to limit my frame rate with a third-party tool because the limiter in the game is busted. I literally start the game up and I'm playing it. So yeah, while consoles are all very similar to each other these days, they still provide a much better experience than playing on PC. Take it from me, someone who splits their time about 60-40 between PS5 and PC. I don't know, I always liked him when he was at PlayStation. It seemed like he was doing good stuff. Great games came out under him, but ever since he left, it's like, bro, what the are you talking about? Anyway, speaking of PlayStation's going away, we have more evidence that they're working on a brand new handheld. Like, yeah, consoles are going to go away in 2 generations, but Sony and Microsoft are both deep in developing a new handheld console to play their games on. Like, what? Anyway, this one's coming from Digital Foundry, the guys who hear everything about hardware. They've been right on pretty much everything except apparently the teraflops in the PlayStation 5 Pro, which I don't care about. And this one's specifically coming from John Linneman in their podcast, which I listen to every week. I highly recommend it. And he said, we actually heard about this handheld some months ago from a couple sources specifically. Then the report from Bloomberg confirmed what we had seen and heard off the record about this existing. Then later on, he said that it seemed like it was farther along than Bloomberg was reporting, so we might actually get to see this a little bit sooner. I'm doubtful of that for the reasons I talked about last week, where, you know, Valve is very talkative lately about the Steam Deck 2 because people are scared right now to buy a Steam Deck because, you know, the Steam Deck 2 might come out in 6 months or something like that. But Valve is sitting there saying, nope, we're not working on the Steam Deck 2 right now. We're like theorizing it, but we don't want to release that hardware until we can provide a chip that is a graphical leap and a performance leap without sacrificing battery life. And that literally doesn't exist right now. So that handheld that Sony's making is going to deal with the exact same problem. So it's a little ways off. The fact that Bloomberg is reporting this and Digital Foundry is reporting that they've heard and seen things about it just makes me 100% believe that this is going to happen. And I'm really excited about it. Sony just makes great hardware. I know a lot of you probably didn't buy the Vita because it did not sell that well, but like, I break out my Vita from time to time because it's a great way to play PS1 games. And I'm still consistently impressed how well that console has aged. Like, yeah, the screen's a little small and low resolution, but if you have the original Vita, the fact that it was OLED at launch was excellent. The screen looked so good. And it's still, like, even with the second version of the Vita, one of the thinnest consoles out there, and it has great battery life. And while the OS is terrible, it gets the job done. Like, you can still get trophies, you can still buy games. It's a great console from top to bottom. And I want that energy back from Sony in the handheld realm, because the options we have right now are the Steam Deck, which I absolutely love because I have a big Steam library, and the Nintendo Switch, eventually the Nintendo Switch 2. With the Steam Deck, I don't really care about the Switch 2. Like, Nintendo's kind of lost the magic for me a little bit because every game kind of feels the same these days. And I think it's me being older because, you know, a young kid who plays Mario Wonder is probably going to love it as much as I love Super Mario World back when I was 5. But I've played every Mario game that's come out in between Super Mario World and Super Mario Wonder. So it's like law of diminishing returns. But I want that Sony touch. I want to be able to play games like Bloodborne or Demon's Souls or Ghost of Tsushima on a handheld where the game gets a specific patch to be able to support that hardware. Like, you can play God of War, you can play Ghost of Tsushima on the Steam Deck, but you got to do a lot of work yourself. You got to run frame generation sometimes, you got to figure out what exact settings. Most of the time it's all low settings. Then Sony can introduce an update that requires the PSN login that completely breaks the online like it did for Ghost of Tsushima. If we get a PlayStation handheld, which it seems like we are, Sony's going to release a patch for this game, Ghost of Tsushima, and then that patch will fine-tune the graphics to get a more consistent frame rate out of this hardware, and you won't have to deal with all the extra BS that comes along with the fact that while the Steam Deck is more of a console than a PC, at the end of the day, you're still playing PC games, so you got to dial in the correct settings yourself. You got to go to YouTube or ProtonTV, find the correct settings that get you a rock solid 30 or 40 or 60 FPS, and, you know, when I get in bed and I'm about to play a game on my Steam Deck, that is literally the last thing I want to do. If I had this new Sony handheld, I wouldn't have to worry about that. I could just download the game to this thing and play it in my bed in 2 seconds, which, again, going back to what I was talking about in the first story, is why we need consoles from the hardware manufacturers that actually also make games, because that's the biggest problem with the Steam Deck. Valve doesn't make games anymore, so, you know, you don't get the fine-tuned graphics performance out of a lot of the stuff that you're playing on the device. Whereas Sony, I buy a PlayStation to play Sony games, and if they're making the PlayStation handheld as well, they're going to make the games look and run great on that thing, and it's going to be awesome. Anyway, that brings us to the third news story here, which is that at one point, PlayStation was lucky to survive. This is from the same Sean Layden interview, and, you know, he was around during this time, so I actually agree with what he's talking about here because I also lived through that era, and it was dire. He said, PS3 is Sony's Icarus moment. We had PS1, PS2, and now we're building a supercomputer, and we're going to put Linux on it, and we're going to do all these sorts of things. We flew too close to the sun, and we were lucky and happy to have survived the experience, but it taught us a lot. You can manage the cost better. You can argue with vendors, get better deals instead of building your own thing. And the most important thing he said is we also learned that the center of the machine has to be gaming. It's not about whether I can stream movies or play music. Can I order a pizza while I'm watching TV and play? No, just make a game machine. Just make it the best game machine of all time. That's all you got to do, right? Like, that's what I was talking about in the first story, where, like, the reason I like console gaming is because all it is a game machine, right? Like, yeah, I can put my 4K Blu-rays in it. I usually don't because it's a really bad experience. Like, I need to get a 4K Blu-ray player because the PS5's disc drive sucks. It, like, skips all the time and freezes when you're watching movies. I used to use it for, like, Netflix and Disney Plus and everything, but I got Apple TVs for all the TVs in my house. It's completely different and better experience than what you get out of the PlayStation 5. I want the PS5 and my desk down here, my desk upstairs, and my TV to serve one purpose. I want to hit the PS button on my controller, and I want in 2 seconds to be playing a game. And any time in between me hitting that button and playing a game, that's distraction time where I could be sucked into Twitter on my phone, or I could be reading an article or reading a book on my iPad or something. And when I want to sit down and play games, I want the lowest barrier of entry to be able to do that. And that's exactly what the PlayStation provides. I think the PS3 started out a little rocky, obviously, because of all that extra crap they added in, like being able to run Linux, being able to use a printer, having a bunch of SD card slots on the front and everything like that. That was dumb. But once they figured it out, lowered the price, and started focusing on making great games for it, that's when it really hit its stride, and that's why I was able to take over the Xbox 360 towards the end of the generation. And that's kind of what primed PlayStation for the PS4 era. It was a kick-ass gaming machine, and for all the problems that the PS5 has with, you know, first-party game output of games that actually utilize the hardware and don't come out unfinished, it's still an awesome machine. When you get a game that lets you see the light, like Space Marine 2, for example, this year, or Gran Turismo 7, you're like, oh yeah, this thing is freaking awesome. So again, going back to the first story, the problem is not the hardware. The problem is developers not finishing their games. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.